Well, here we go again.
Another Saturday. Another Saturday, another couple bottles of wine. Not that that's different than any other Saturday.
By the way, I hear hair salons are starting to open up a little bit.
No, they not going to happen.
No, come on.
This is the big internet craze now. Everybody, you need your
That's not internet craze.
Just because yours won't grow out anymore.
Oh, that's BS. I cut my own last week anyway. Welcome back, everyone. It's good to have you for week 7. We're starting to go crazy here, but we're glad you joined us again. I'm John Williams, owner and winemaker of Frog Sleep Winery.
And I'm Rory Williams, the actual owner and winemaker of Frog Sleep
Winery. Actual.
Sorry, I'm switching it up.
Next week you go first. Oh wait,
Ooh.
You will go first.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
Next week you're going to be here with Anthony Troussard
Yep.
and doing your thing, and I get a weekend off maybe.
You might get a weekend off. So
Or I
we'll see.
might-
Although we might force you to photobomb.
I may make
So next week, just to point out kind of where we're going in the next couple of weeks. Next week I'll be joining with Anthony Troussard, who, for those of you who've been following along and are big fans, the Troussard Vineyard is the sole source of our Chardonnay, and we've been buying Merlot from them for a long time as well. And so we'll get to chat with Anthony, and he'll have a couple of the Troussard wines that he'll be talking about, the Roussanne and the Pinot Noir, I believe, and we'll be pouring our Chardonnay and our Merlot vineyard selection from Troussard.
And Anthony, like you, is following in the deep and broad footsteps of his father.
Trying to clean things up, in other words.
It should be fun, and I'm looking forward to listening. Although I might photobomb come out.
You're listening from the hammock, you mean? Yeah.
Well, that might happen. But that's next week. This week, we wanted to talk to you about sustainability. And I was telling Rory before we came on, I have a few misgivings about this session. One of them, of course, is that I am totally prepared, and you've done absolutely nothing to prepare like usual.
It's all up here.
And so I'm going to give you the outline.
Oh,
here.
thank you.
Because I can't read it without my glasses on anyway.
Perfect.
But two, talking about this whole subject of sustainability, there are a few pitfalls. There's actually no real legal definition of what it means to be sustainable. And quite honestly, in this world of green marketing and so on, I often see it used as almost an excuse for not doing anything, as well, we're not this or we're not that, but we're sustainable. And so we're a little cautious about that. We also, I'm a little cautious about coming across as if we have all the answers with this. The thoughts that we're going to talk about today have been deeply ingrained in our business for almost the full 40 years. And so we feel comfortable talking about it, but we do not want to come off as sounding like, we're some saint for doing this, or that we've got it all figured out, or that we're holier than thou in any way. This subject is deep and broad. It has got so many complications to it, so many aspects to it, that you're never done with sustainability. It is a process. It's not a destination. Wouldn't you? I think it's fair to say.
I think that's the critical thing to be thinking about. It's kind of, for those of you that joined us for the organic seminar a few weeks ago, we started off by talking about organics not as this, this destination that you arrive at and you say, all right, sweet, we're organic. There is a legal definition now of organic, and you can think about it that way. But the way we think about organic and the way we think about sustainable is you aren't just are sustainable. It's not like, okay, we planted a flag and we are sustainable now. And what do we do now? Sustainability it's just a byword really for a thought process, for an attitude of your business, and an attitude about how you go about making decisions, basically. And I think that is really hopefully what we're going to dig into a little bit.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about how this became an evolving ethos at Frog Sleep. And how we are thinking about it. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that we are not there yet. There are so many aspects of the way we farm, the way we do run business, that need improvement, and quite frankly, and so the challenges are very much out in front of us. We got a question from the organic seminar we didn't get to is, well, don't you use diesel fuel in your tractors? And the answer is yes, we do. And what are you going to do about that?
Yeah, that's there are challenges that crop up all the time. You're never done tinkering with things, you're never done experimenting, you're never done moving forward as long as you've got the right perspective on this. And I think that's, hopefully along with drinking a little bit of wine today.
Well, I was going to say that's my other great fear, and this is a fairly dry subject.
Might need a little bit of wine.
We might need a little bit of wine, and we hope you enjoyed along with us. We couldn't think of a better wine to talk to have in our company as we're talking about sustainability than Zinfandel. And I know we've already talked a little bit about Zinfandel, but we have two new ones today, including the 17 Molinari.
17 Molinari Vineyard. That's the one we're going to pour into our glass first, is the 2017 Molinari Vineyard Zinfandel.
And I think we've talked about the Molinaris before.
We mentioned them, and I think it's, so we'll talk about the wine. Switch it up a little bit and talk about the wine here just for a second. The Molinari Vineyard.
You talk about the wine, I'm going to drink it. Wow, that is great.
The Molinari Vineyard is one of our two large or sort of primary Zinfandel vineyards. We also have our Gonzales Vineyard, which is quite small, and the White Barn Vineyard, which between the White Barn and Molinari, those are kind of the two main sources of Zinfandel that we have. The Molinari Vineyard is right in the center of the town of St. Helena. Yeah. So
you can wander off to Main Street and kind of into the vineyard almost.
You can cut around the vineyard, and it helps you sidestep some of the traffic sometimes, actually. But it's on basically pure gravel.
We won't ask them to do that if the Molinaris are listening.
Yeah, exactly. Basically on pure gravel. It's often being towards the eastern side of the valley. It gets a lot of that afternoon sunlight. And it is often our most, and I'd say almost always, our most intense Zinfandel. There's a little bit of Petit Syrah planted on the property as well that co-ferments with this in. This is about 10% Petit Syrah, so 90% Zinfandel in this. And that I think year in and year out, I believe this is actually from Dickerson block.
I think so.
The most intense block at this particular vineyard.
So an intense block from an intense clone in an intense year. And yet this wine has got charm and is gracious and smooth and destined for lots of years in the bottle. This is fun. This is fun. Yeah.
I think it's very, very cool. Zed, do you want to maybe give the basic outline of sustainability?
When people talk about sustainability, at least in the bigger picture, they talk about the three E's of sustainability, or the three legs that the platform of sustainability stands on. One of those, it wouldn't be the first to come to mind, is economic viability. And obviously, and we'll talk about this, you can be the most organic farmer in the world. You can be the most caring employer, but if you go out of business, then all this goes to hell. So, so this is one of the E's of sustainability, if you will, is economic viability. And we'll come back to that thought. The other two are probably what we would more think of. The one that we would probably come to mind most of all, of course, is environmental resiliency or environmental sustainability. The idea that we need to nurture our environment to be able to maintain into the future. So that's the second E, is environmental. So, economic, environmental. And the third one is you have to look for the second word to get to the E, and that's social equity. And that's the social aspect of sustainability. And I think that's one that we have put a lot of focus on more of late. I think as I became more interested in all these aspects, it was really an outgrowth of our starting to farm organically and understanding the difficulties with the modern agricultural paradigms that we talked about in the organic seminar. And so we really put a lot of effort into understanding the environmental side of this through the grape farming, essentially. But it didn't take too long to start asking questions of, well, yeah, now we're not using Roundup or we're not using pesticides, but where do our farm workers sleep? What are our buildings made of? Where does our power come from? What about our watershed? Some of the other aspects that you might not have necessarily thought about when you started with organic farming. And that's really this environmental side of things. And I'm very proud of our legacy, but boy, the challenges still are out there. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and I think it's, just like in organic farming, we'll touch maybe on environmental first, and hopefully all of you have seen or caught a portion of the organic farming
seminar. You can go back and see it, right?
On interactive.frogsleep.com.
Oh my gosh!
Thumbs up from the production team. Awesome. We always forget to mention all the things. Other thing, I see a few of you have already engaged with this, which is use the Q&A function in Zoom and upvote questions you like, and we'll try to get to all of them. We've got a few questions left over from the organic seminar that we'll try to work into what we are talking about today. But like organic farming, you're not really thinking about when it comes to environmental sustainability and how that interacts with the other kind of legs of sustainability. You're looking for those kinds of solutions that are going to solve multiple problems for you.
Yeah.
And so, problems happen every day in the winery. They happen out in the vineyard. They happen out in the winery. They happen just in the tasting room. They happen everywhere.
It's why I laughed when I saw one of the questions that came up and said, "What's the most difficult agricultural challenge you faced?" And our answer would be, "Do you mean on Tuesday or Thursday?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you're always looking for solutions in any business, not just a farming business, but we're out there and, we need to get this particular task done in the vineyard, or I'm noticing this pest starting to come up in the vineyard. What are we going to do about it? And there's a way of thinking about that is just, okay, well, we have problem X, let's go find solution Y, and solution Y will solve problem X, and then it's just sort of isolated like that the problems exist in isolation in your business. And I think sustainability is that mode of thinking about things such that you're looking for that solution that's going to solve
more holistic. Yeah.
I remember that when this was a few years ago, really actually 2010 or around then when I first started coming back to the winery, we were still throwing away all of our stems. So red grapes come into the winery and they get destemmed. The berries get knocked off of what's called the rachis, or the hard kind of woody stem of a grape bench. I get a lot further out of the rabbit hole. You stop interrupting.
Okay.
And so these stems fall out and you just collect them in a bin, and then the bin kind of moves away while you deal with the important parts. And at the end of the day, you've got this big smelly bin of
and you send off to the landfill.
That you send off to the landfill, right? Well, that seemed a little silly to us. We already were composting all of our grape skins and all of our garden clippings and all of that, but we were paying money to have somebody come and take away these stems when we were looking for a solution not to do that.
Yeah.
So we developed a stem chopper for the winery that solved
you missed that step, and the reason is that they were hard to break down in the composting operation because they're so fibrous and they had to be chopped into smaller pieces.
Yeah.
So
so we built a stem chopper, and all of a sudden we had more compost, and we were no longer paying money to send the stems off to the landfill. So less things into landfill, more things into our compost pile.
I think the environmental side of the 3 Ds of sustainability are where we could spend all day talking, as you some of you got a taste of this when we talked about organic farming, but it really is a systematic thinking. It's involving yourself into, we get questions, for example, about what do you do about birds? Birds like to eat grapes. So how do you solve that problem? Well, in the conventional farming, you either shoot them or poison them, or trap them. And of course, that's not a very environmentally friendly way of doing it. So you have to be thinking more holistic. So now what we do is we actually encourage birds into the vineyard. In fact, how many hundreds of birdhouses have you put around the vineyard?
We've got a couple of hundred bluebird boxes. And it's again, we were talking last during the organic seminar about the kind of the small details of farming that make a huge difference. And I'll get into this a little bit when we talk about social equity as well.
Right.
It's not immediately connecting, but we'll point out where it does.
Boy, this wine is immediately connecting, by the way.
It is. But, so you can build a bird box, right? Or you can go down to the local hardware store and you get a bird box. The problem with that is you put a bird box out there and you'll get the pest birds that go out and eat grapes. If you cut the wrong diameter hole into your box.
Right.
Turns out if you have an 1.5 inch diameter hole, you get bluebirds and swallows, which are big insectivores. They're out there eating insects all day long.
Helpful to us in the farming.
If you make the hole 1 3/4 inches in diameter, you get European starlings, which are out there to bully the bluebirds. They're an invasive species.
Just waiting to eat your grapes later on.
And they're just hanging out, ready to eat your grapes as soon as they pop out. So that 1/4 inch that you decided to drill into your bird box makes all of the difference.
And the bluebirds, by the way, will defend their territory and scare off the birds who are destined to eat your grapes. And so this is, I mean, it's a very small example, but one where it's a good example of how thinking more holistically or more sustainably, you can solve a problem that is much more ecologically valuable in that respect. What's coming to you in this wine?
Honestly,
a little more.
Honestly, something that I don't necessarily always get out of Zinfandel, which is mineral. This is so intense that it's got very, very dark black fruit. We often associate Zinfandel with this kind of bright, super bright red fruit.
Man, yeah, this
is quite dark. There's a good question on here about what it would taste like without the Petit Syrah. And it might be a little bit lighter, although this is for us, this is a fairly low percentage of Petit Syrah. But
yeah.
What would it taste like without the Petit Syrah? I think you'd have a little bit, obviously you have a little bit less tannin and all of that. But also, the reason we love the Petit Syrah in there isn't
where did the alcohol weigh in on this wine?
This is in the mid-14s, I believe.
Yeah, so this is a little stronger than we usually do, 14.4. Yeah. Well, it'd be even more than that without the Petit Syrah, probably, right?
It would be a little bit more alcoholic, and I think the reason that we co-ferment Petit Syrah in there isn't so much to give Petit Syrah flavor to our Zinfandel. It's that Petit Syrah, when it's co-fermented in with Zinfandel, tends to amplify and lift up that Zinfandel character, and really helps reinforce, kind of fills out its corners in a way that makes the Zinfandel more joyful and more.
Do you suppose the people at Chateau Simone, in the Palat, right, who make a wine that's got 13 or 14 varieties in it, ever sit around going, gee, I wonder what would happen if we didn't have the, the Valdegay in this or whatever?
Right, yeah. I think it's a good question, and it's I don't think you usually think about those kinds of things from the same thing at Chateau de Beaucastel. Do they think about in Chateauneuf de Pape? Do they think about what would it be without the Negrette in this?
Or what if we had one with a little less Viognier this year?
I mean, they're interesting questions, but really what you're looking for or what we're looking for with this wine is not that, hey, the Zinfandel and Molinari is lacking some character. We need a little bit of Petit Syrah in there. It's that Molinari is about 90% Zinfandel and about 10% Petit Syrah, the vineyard itself. And so if we're looking for an expression of Molinari Vineyard Zinfandel,
it should be in percentage.
It should be 90 to 10.
Yeah.
Why was it planted to 90% Zinfandel and 10% Petit Syrah?
Yeah, why was that?
It goes back. It reminds me, puts me in mind of a tale.
Oh, you're fine.
Some of those details are.
We weren't even around when we.
Some of those details are ripe for the good old California story.
We'd have to ask Frank. He was spitballing it. Yeah.
I think from that perspective, it's just an expression of that particular site, and it's hard to imagine Molinari without the Zinfandel at this point because these grapes are crushed in together.
Let's close out the E part that's about environmental, but I don't want the time to pass without, I guess, brag just a little bit. Not brag. Yeah, it is bragging.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, look, when we started thinking along this direction, and this will close out the environmental part of this, we really started thinking seriously about where our power came from. And that was just at the beginning of solar powered arrays becoming available. And so we went solar, and we've been producing our electricity for the most part using solar panels since, 2005. So 15, 16 years now. And it's been wonderful. We've actually, and it's something to talk about, we're actually looking for even better power solutions because solar hasn't turned out not to be entirely reliable during the fires and during these brownouts and so on, because you're still hooked to the grid. So here we have to just keep reevaluating. We were one of the first wineries to use geothermal heating and cooling. So if any of you have been to the winery and you park out in our parking lot, underneath that are 20 250-foot wells that are recirculating water that drive our heat pumps to cool and heat our buildings. 75% more efficient than using fossil fuels, and hidden and wonderful, and the electric pumps that circulate it are run by solar. We are the first winery in California to build a LEED certified building, the hospitality building. So many of you have joined us in and tasting. I don't know if you knew this was the first LEED certified building in the entire California wine industry. Very proud of that. This requires recycled building materials and so on and so forth. They're any one of a number of these, the biodiversity, the farming system where we're growing other crops, almost 40 other crops besides grapes, so essential to our organic farming, but also part of our resilience as a farm and as a biological entity. And the thing probably I'm most proud of is the work we did on the watershed when we bought our vineyard along the Napa River. I got 33 other people in Rutherford, people who had property along the river, to jointly start a river restoration project that has become the model for the nation and one of the most ambitious river restoration programs ever attempted privately in this country. I'm very, very proud of the work we did on that, for sure.
I think it's, you touched on the solar aspect, and I think the river restoration that we did, when was that? That was 2001, 2002?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Quite a while ago. So that, we encountered a problem. I say we, I was still in high school, but we encountered this problem at Galeran where the banks were eroding away. The river was flooding every single year.
Silting the spawning beds for salmon.
Taking out vines and just overall being a poor habitat for native species. And so the solution to that was not, hey, let's dump a bunch of rocks in there to stabilize the riverbank. It's, okay, let's think about a more holistic solution for this. And that takes often working with other people.
It is one of the things that we're going to end up talking about here, is that so many of these problems cannot be solved at the individual level or even at the farm level. They have to be done at the community or the national level, and to be effective. And so enough of that. But anyway, we can bore you to death with some of these environmental things we've done, but I think many of you are familiar with them, the dry farming, et cetera, et cetera. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the social equity part of this, because I think this is where you can take a little bit of pride.
Yeah,
and perhaps talk to us a little bit about, we have 62 employees at the winery, so we make a big difference in a lot of people's families' lives, and never more evident now than during this pandemic or what's going on right now.
I think it's, the social equity side is, you can hit on some top line points about fair pay and all of that. But I think, it ties into some of the economic sustainability as well, where we are, we're employing everybody here at the winery on an ongoing basis, even during this crisis. And, I think it follows up nicely with the decision we made several years ago to go to an all full-time vineyard staff. And that's something that touches with me pretty closely, because that's how I got my start back in with Frogsley, was working out in the vineyard, working with our vineyard team, our 20 strong vineyard team, out there in all our vineyards. We farm about 175 acres here in Rutherford and St. Helena. That, requires quite a bit of work to maintain those vines the way we want to. And we made the decision to abandon essentially seasonal work. I think in 2015 is when we made the decision to go to all full-time and to bring everybody up to the same level of vacation benefits.
Your sister was a big part of this too.
Retirement benefits. I think that, a lot of this is helps the winery, helps everybody, but it ties into that kind of the farming, and it points to our commitment, I think, to high quality farming, and to just the idea that that's the right thing to do. And I think it's a recognition of something that we have here in Napa that is not unique to Napa or Sonoma, but it's something that is really incredible here. We have this extremely long tradition of greatness, really excellence in vineyard care. in work out in the vineyards. And this is a difficult topic to talk about, but high quality winemaking, high quality grape growing exists in the details. And I think it's, we talk about kind of top level stuff like organic farming and, hey, we're organic, we're dry farmed. A lot of what makes one wine different from another is the right way of leafing, or the right way, especially the right way of pruning, the right way of training that vine up the stake, the right way of forming that vine out into the correct form that's going to balance the amount of sunlight that it receives, the amount of water that it needs to draw on in the soil. That root needs to be planted in the correct way. When the vine is mature, you can go out to any vine and you pull off one leaf, not going to make that big of a difference. If you pull off 10,000 leaves incorrectly, you have a completely different wine. You have a wine, you have grapes that come into the winery and can be unsalvageable on occasion, and like require a lot more intervention.
One bad barrel in 100 can really change a wine too, right?
And I think that this was something that was not, I wouldn't say that it's something that we were, bad at before or anything like that. I think we've always valued this aspect of the business, but I think that having that kind of permanence within the winery of the full-time employment was something that was extremely important to Frank. It was extremely important to me, and extremely important to the whole winery. I think it really fits in with that.
Well, and extremely important to those families who have joined us as well.
Yeah.
The social commitment is a two-way street. It's more than a two-way street. It's the value of this to the employer, but it's also the value of this to the employee. But add to that the value to our community, to our nation, to our universe, and you can see that this is a profound impact. So do not forget the E called social equity and sustainability. You will do so at your peril, and it really is, and it may be the foundation for everything else, and builds that environmental resiliency, but also what we have found is that it builds the economic viability as well to have high quality work. You have to think about some of these things a little bit in the longer term and the longer horizon than just a quarterly financial report, which would explain to you that the best thing to do from a business point of view would be fire these people on the weeks that they're not that we can't use them at peak efficiency, but that really doesn't work out in the long run. I don't believe.
Well, I think it points down to diversity in the business that we've brought in with the gardens that we have. Many of you who have visited the winery have seen the gardens, seen the orchards. They're not just for show; they're productive gardens and productive orchards. And so I saw the cellar crew out here thinning apples the other day off of the apple trees.
Yeah, they were throwing them at me. They don't exactly like them.
But I think that kind of diversity to the business is what's allowing us right now to keep everybody on staff. And really, thanks really to you guys for staying engaged with us and engaging in virtual tastings, not just with my dad and I, but with everybody in the tasting room here. And that's really what the ability to be flexible is what keeps us going. And I think building that flexibility, or another word for it is resiliency, what you do out in the vineyard is mirrored elsewhere in your business. And I think that's why we view sustainability as this kind of interconnected.
So we put people to sleep, or are there any questions coming out here?
We got some, we have a few questions. So it seems like Zins tend to be higher in alcohol. Is that true? And if so, why? Zinfandel, higher in alcohol.
It tends that direction, and the reason is that it's a big berry grape. If you look at a Zinfandel grape, it's nothing like a Cabernet Sauvignon or Sauvignon Blanc grape, which is little. And thank you. And so to get the full development of flavor, just smell how flavorful this wine is. The grapes have got to be pretty ripe to develop this beautiful summer fruit sort of character. And so it's almost impossible to get this level of flavor in Zinfandel until you get it to 24, 24 and a half, almost 25 degrees Brix. And these grapes were actually picked at 26 degrees Brix. That's a high octane wine. And if you remember when we did the Zinfandel tastings, that our trick about this is that we want the Zinfandel to get very ripe, But our trick is to actually co-ferment them with other varieties, in this case, Petit Sera, but with our regular 17 Zinfandel, it's Petit Sera and Carignan. And those other grapes don't need to be so ripe to have flavor, and they're lower in sugar. And so when they ferment all together, those grapes bring the overall sugar content down. So we don't so we don't achieve typically in our Zinfandels an alcohol degree over 14%. Like we said, this wine is 14.4, but the next wine we're going to have, I believe, the 2010 is well under 14% alcohol. And so it's really just the nature of the grape that needs this much ripeness to develop.
Yeah. Well, it's also the Zinfandel, that just a historical note. I mean, the Zinfandel, was and is widely planted in California. Well, why? Why Zinfandel of all things? It's that it's very easy to ripen Zinfandel. Zinfandel tends to kind of flash on you during, it has a fairly narrow, if you look at our windows for picking Sauvignon Blanc, the long window of picking Sauvignon Blanc, it ripens, not slowly, but it's got this broad window where you can kind
3 weeks, a month,
dance around your vineyards and pick Sauvignon Blanc at the right time. Cabernet kind of works the same way. Cabernet harvest will sometimes go for over a month. We're done picking Zinfandel in a week.
When it decides to go,
decides to go, we basically drop everything because we know that Zinfandel, once it gets to that ripeness, it doesn't take much to push it well beyond that. And that in the past is why people loved if you were a grower where your price per ton that you would receive for your Zinfandel was completely predicated.
You got to sugar them up.
You got to sugar them up. It was completely predicated. You're getting full price was completely predicated on you getting lots of sugar in the grape. And Zinfandel was really easy to do that with. So, bang, you got these big berries, big clusters, and easy to sugar up. 2 thumbs up.
Let me ask you this, because it's kind of a dirty little secret in the wine industry that the reason some of the wineries in the old days and maybe even current days like the high sugar grapes is that they'll actually dilute those musts with water and increase their yield to bring the sugar content down. Do you think that's as prevalent as it was in the co-op days?
I think it's always been prevalent. I do believe it'll always be prevalent too. So, that on that note, with regarding sugar and Zinfandel, will it be possible to ever make a sparkling Frog's Leaf wine? And we've actually made a sparkling Zinfandel.
Oh, now you. Moving on here.
If you ever had the 1994 Zinfandel,
you will never have a bottle of 1994 Zinfandel.
It went unintentionally sparkling in the bottle. Sorry, I had to break. Come on. We've had 2 tastings of Zinfandel. I haven't brought up the 94 even once. It's our highest ever
you
rated
look out
Zinfandel.
Next week, man. You look out next week. Just when you think I'm not watching, I'm going to zonk you.
And just so you know, Frog's Leaf Winery will pay hard cash for any bottles of 94 Zinfandel that you find out there. I will personally write you a big, large check, like they do at charity golf tournaments.
Yeah, for $1.
All I need is 1 bottle. You can still write $1 on it. The check's still big.
Well, not all the bottles went bad, by the way, so you might have got the one.
That's usually what we mean when we say we'll write a big check, is that we'll write a small amount on a very large check. So I don't think we're ever going to make a true sparkling method champenoise.
I don't know, maybe, Kyler's doing a great job with his cider, so he might be our sparkling expert at some point here.
My brother Kyler makes actually a delicious bottle conditioned, which means traditional method, dry hard cider called Far Cider. That is, it's pretty freaking good.
It is,
and
hard to get.
It's hard to get,
He wouldn't even sell me any. Jesus.
That's because you wouldn't meet his price. You wanted a family discount. He didn't. No, none of that.
I should get a.
Dad, do we want to move on to the 2010?
Yes, so let's do that and move on in the E's to talk very briefly about the economic viability, and we would be remiss not to add that to the discussion, quite frankly, because what you find in so much when you deal with environmental matters and so on is that environmental concerns are the first thing sacrificed when people are on hard times, basically. And so any discussion of sustainability that doesn't include a discussion of economic viability is false, in my opinion. And so it has to be something that we consider when we are in business of making wine. And it always it always surprises me that people who would otherwise be very thoughtful in this world will jump all over themselves to find a bottle of wine that's $1 a bottle cheaper, or a really cheap bottle of wine. And I think that one thing that we know from sustainability is that that if we want to change the discussion on this, we have to vote with our dollars, essentially. And that if something is so much cheaper, if it's a $2 bottle of wine, I won't mention any names, right? Something had to give in the process of making that wine to allow it to be so cheap. So just think about that. The first thing that goes is the environment. Right after how you pay your farm workers, how you treat your farm workers, then goes the environment, then goes the things that we can put onto society. So fire your workers and have them go on unemployment. Well, that's costing us money, the rest of us money, maybe safe to that particular vintner, but we're all paying the price one way or the other. So you have to think about this, the cost of things in a much bigger picture. So be careful when you go for the cheapest of anything. I know I have the same problem when I'm shopping in the grocery store, and I'm looking at the difference in a bundle of asparagus that's 80 cents more expensive to be organic, or even more than that. And it just go, well, no one's looking. I think I'll save the buck, you know. Something's going wrong there. There's a reason why in some cases things are a little bit more expensive and are almost always worth it. So vote with your dollars when it comes to this topic of sustainability, because economic viability of organizations is key to them supporting the environmental and the social equity parts of sustainability. Did I make that a windy diatribe? I'm sorry.
No. I think it is important that you know, commitment requires dollars as well as thought, and so that's you know, we try to maintain ourselves as a reasonably priced wine, and I think that's, you know, been a big part of our resiliency, I guess, over 40 years of it being in business, is that we are not trying to be this big flash in the pan $200 wine out there, but it's, you know, we've tried to bring that in, but we
what was the old cartoon one? I think it was in the New Yorker. There's a young lady selling apples on the street for $100 for an apple, and a gentleman comes along and says, "Boy, that's an awful lot to ask for an apple. Do you sell many?" And she says, "All I have to sell is one."
Yeah, fair enough. That 2010 Zinfandel.
Wow, you know, it's kind of like, who chose these wines? These are difficult vintages, both 17 and 10. This was a vintage with a lot of heat, very reminiscent of 17 in a way.
This was very similar to 2017 in a lot of ways. Well, nothing's like 17 really in the complete picture.
Yeah.
Our production team is laughing at me for saying that, and it's true.
Our production team.
You know, 2010 was interesting because early on that year it was actually pretty cold. We had all these. We actually had a lot of mildew and botrytis pressure early on in the year, and so we ended up having to pull a lot of leaves off of these vines in order to increase the airflow. And then, of course, nature decided to throw a few 100+ degree days at us, and we had a bunch of heat spikes late in the season, which made 2010 a difficult vintage, especially for Zinfandel. And there was a good question up on the Q&A about not particularly enjoying the 2010 the first time they had it. And it was an interesting question because, you know, this wine that I think has lost a lot of its big explosive fruitiness that you can taste it a little bit in the 2017, or if you taste you know, a newer vintage of Zinfandel, or even I think even if you were to taste a 2007 Zinfandel, which was a much more even, more
classic,
kind of a classic vintage, that would still retain a lot more of that kind of core of fruit. I think this wine has not gone, but it's developed a lot more of its tertiary aromas. So
so do you think this is maybe? It's a 10-year-old wine, right? So the idea that it's prematurely aging seems ridiculous. It's already 10 years old. But, you know, we're used to tasting wines at 20 and 30, Zinfandels at 20 and 30 years of age at Frog Sleep that are still so vibrant. This wine seems to be a little advanced for its.
I think it's definitely advanced for its age, and I think what it means.
I'm going to drink the rest of mine tonight.
Yeah, I drink them up.
I think it's still got a long life, but
it's got a long life in a different direction than a lot of other years. Where some of the years they'll retain that kind of core of fruit for a longer time. The 2010 seems to have lost that a little bit earlier on than it usually does, and it's developing this kind of cigar box and mineral and the leather and earthy kind of aromas that can pop up are kind of classic to old red wine in general. But Zinfandel often you'll find that after several years. In our favorite really old vintages of Zinfandel, so 91, things like 90, 94, clearly, right?
86 and 87.
86, 87, 99, years like that where the wine really does, even now, tasting those wines, they'll have this core of kind of Zinfandel fruit to them, while also developing all of these other tertiary aromas. If you joined us for the 91 Zinfandel tasting several weeks ago, we didn't bring our monocles with us today.
No, we didn't. We need some more monocles.
Old Zins tend to get what they call claret-like, which is just a weird kind of antiquated way of saying that they start to taste like old Bordeaux and old Cabernet in a way. The wines start to converge like that. And that can be, and I'm not surprised, if you go into tasting a 2010 Zinfandel with the idea that it's going to have a lot of fruit, I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't the favorite wine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's just a kind of the nature of vintages aging differently and along different lines. So, but with that said, I'm enjoying the wine, but I think this is a wine that is definitely kind of far further along on its track, like you said.
Yeah. And that's not the worst of things. You want those kind of wines in your cellar, so you haven't got to wait 10 more years. You can say, well, let's have the 10. I'm feeling with a little more, like I want a wine with a little more maturity. And this is what developing a cellar and a knowledge of your cellar why it's so exciting and why people collect wine, quite frankly. And I think it makes it work.
So what percentage of Zinfandel does Frog Sleep produce versus the other varieties? Zinfandel is about 1/6 of our acreage, together with Petit Syrah and Carignan.
So you have to divide 10 by 6 to come up with a percentage.
Why just two Molinari vintages, 2012 and 2017?
We don't want, these are grapes that we work with a Molinari family, and we don't want to drive up the price because, these are going to cost us more. Why don't we actually?
It's a good question. I think for many years when we were doing our kind of fellowship selections, we had the idea that it had to be a different wine every year or else you all would get bored. It turns out that's completely wrong. You guys would actually like to see many of the same wines every year.
Well, I'll read you the first sentence on my the winemaker note on the 17 Molinari Zinfandel. It says,
I wrote it because I'm the winemaker.
You did not. It's been 5 years since we bottled a single vineyard Molinari Zinfandel. I know. What were we thinking?
I believe the question still stands. Yeah.
Apparently the question still stands. So
basically, Molinari is fabulous every year, and it's always difficult to take out these fellowship selections from the blend because, man, they're really good. On the one hand, you want to bottle them separately because they're so good. On the other hand, you really want them in the main Zinfandel blend to give all their goodness to that blend. And so we're going to look to find ways to, I think, roll Molinari out there a little bit more often than we do.
Well, as I sip the 10, there is one subject here that that seems relevant to this whole question of sustainability that doesn't fit into the 3 E's. It's something that we're having to think about now that, when I started with all this, it wasn't even in our consciousness. And that's the impact or potential impacts of climate change. And I think we as farmers are becoming more and more aware that these effects are real and are progressing and are concerning. And it opens up the question of what the heck are we doing about it? And I'll tell you, it's a little... it's a hard conversation to have, quite frankly. I get people all the time saying, hey, we hear about climate change and that Napa Valley Cabernets aren't going to be as good 50 years from now when the planet's gone crazy. And I go, yeah, I've heard the same thing. Of course, I've also heard that there's going to be widespread desertification, global economic collapse, displacement of the world's population, spreading famine, and our Cabernet isn't going to taste so good. So I think whenever we discuss
which one of these is not like the other?
Which of these is not like the other? But yes, we are concerned. But I think that anyone who isn't concerned, and I'm pointing my finger at you all, is making a big mistake. Basically, that said, what are we doing about climate change? Both to do what we can as a business, because it's important to us to do so, to reduce our footprint or our impact on the climate, but also as farmers and as a business, what are we doing to think about what we have to do to mitigate the potential changes in the climate that are coming along?
And I think it is right, Dad. And we talked about problems that require
a global solution.
Global solutions, and if you talk about solutions that you do find in the winery that hopefully address other problems, it seems like climate change is the thing that just sort of sits there right on top of everything, overlooking every decision you make, overlooking everything you've done in the past and whether that was the best thing to do, and challenges that we currently face. We'll go back to the question about is our farm equipment gas powered? It's diesel powered. We wish it weren't. We took a look at an electric powered tractor not last year, but the year before, for harvest, and it didn't perform the way that was necessary to work in a business.
We trudged all over Italy looking for.
We trudged all over Italy looking for the tractor company Fendt, which is just in Europe, is coming out with a prototype of an electric tractor. But again, it's not out in use. It's not ready for prime time yet. We're signed up this fall I signed us up, I don't know if I told you, to work with Monarch Tractor, which is a kind of new venture of an electric tractor spearheaded by Carlo Mondavi here in Napa. And they're working on hopefully a fully functional electric tractor. That's kind of the dream with this, because that is a significant portion of our emissions. But Dad, honestly, I've gone through this, and you can go out and calculate and figure out where your emissions are coming from, and there are lots of things to attack. And I think it all starts with the correct kind of mindset about how you're asking, what questions are you asking, and what are you really addressing?
No stone can go unturned when it comes to this question, because even the smallest ability to bend the curve, I think, is important. And I will put that as a challenge out to all of you. That we signed on to what are called the Porto Protocols. A number of the wine industry got together and started to write some things that we could all be doing as a wine industry to bend this curve. And the challenge went out, and it's really the challenge I'll put to you. If you're doing nothing with respect to the mitigation of climate change, just do something. Just do one thing. If you're doing a little bit, do a little bit more. And if you're working really hard at it, find new ways to challenge yourself. That's the way it's got to be, basically.
And so we're very proud of the way that we've, a lot of the ways that we farm, especially with the dry farming, which, we've got another session without really diving into the details of dry farming, but the ability to grow a grapevine without added energy for pumping water out of the aquifer, and allowing the vine to use its own energy to go find that water, and to not be applying that water onto the surface, onto a dry surface in the middle of summer. Turns out that releases lots of nitrous oxide, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. These are kinds of things that 10 years ago, I don't know that anybody was thinking about, really in that kind of level of detail. So dry farming already helps us with that. Is that a reason to go, okay, we're good to go? It really isn't. And I think, that doesn't offset any of the things that, that we could still do better at.
And we're always cautious talking about this, because you'll get someone who will write in and say, well, yeah, you drive a car to work, and lots of our employees drive a car to work. We don't have a good bus system. We don't have a good train system. It's a problem society. Now, could we buy electric cars for all our employees? Well, now we got this economic imperative.
I think that's when you look at it, can be a little overwhelming in a certain way. When we're looking at if you're looking kind of top down at some of the biggest issues that exist in a winery, you're looking at two of them right here: glass itself.
Yeah.
The kind of tendency for Napa Cabernets especially to exist in extremely heavy bottles that are over twice the weight of our bottles, just so they look impressive, and you pick them up and you can't tell whether they're empty or full.
Is that empty or full?
That's
That's really one way to find out. There we go. Thank you, sir.
We've always gone with lightweight glass. I think that's something that that we're proud of and that we're going to go with on an ongoing basis. All of these things are kind of chipping away at what can we do? What problems can we solve by ourselves, and what kind of thought process is necessary for that? I think that's kind of honestly got the 3 E's and all of that. I think that's good. It's a way to start, but I think that honestly, sustainability has already rolled over into this kind of bigger picture.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
Bigger picture with this single, big target right in front of you, because it really does address everything. We talked about social equity, social sustainability within the winery. Probably our biggest emissions impact in the vineyard is driving cars between Napa, the city of Napa, and the town of Rutherford every day for everybody on the vineyard crew, everybody at the winery, everybody in the cellar crew, because very few people live in Rutherford because there are no homes in Rutherford. And that's has definitely its benefits. That's why Napa is so strongly agricultural. It's why all these vineyards are here in the first place, is that they haven't been plowed under. But it creates, challenges going forward of how do we build a sustainable, method of transportation between these, between vineyard and home. It's something that we simply do not, we've attempted some answers, and we don't have the right answer yet. And I think it's...
You started carpooling, but sometimes you do all these things and you think, well, I just moved it so small. Why did we, with such a small degree? But we can't think like that. We have to think that every small step we make, even just go turn on a light right now, even one small step, if we all did a little bit, it would have a much bigger impact than us doing a lot. And we're planning on doing a lot and a lot more. So come on, it's fair enough for you to recycle these bottles, for goodness sakes. That's the least we can do, right?
And Dad, I think it's the reason we talk about it from this perspective, you realize we haven't really talked about what we think is going to happen to Napa Cabernet. That's usually these discussions about climate change are framed in the context of, what's going to happen to Napa Cabernet? I don't know yet. I think from an operational perspective, we'll figure it out as long as we get the much bigger problem figured out.
Why are you pointing at me? I'm sure you didn't mean that.
No, I didn't mean that. But I think that it often it's a little bit of it's missing the forest for the trees in a lot of ways, to just be thinking about, is Napa Cabernet going to maintain its status? Don't know. Hope so, and we're going to do everything we can to continue to make great Cabernet. If it means that in 100 years we're growing some other variety, maybe that's just the way it is. But if we've done everything that we can to fight that and to build resiliency, build sustainability in our business and in the environment around us, I think that's what we try to do now, and I think that's the focus that we have to have.
Well, and the promise that we'll make, and that's that if it is enough for variety, and you can see we're not committed to just one variety anyway, that variety will be made with the same passion, with the same ethos, with the same care, and with the same sense of responsibility to the principles of sustainability that are important to us all. So that's what's coming down. How are we doing there? We must have someone there.
We do have some good questions. There's one that's really interesting. Do you think this year's hoped for cleaner environment could affect the grape quality in this year's vintage? In the sense that properly made wine will reflect the vintage, whatever it is, good or bad. Yeah, it'll reflect it. Don't know what that's going to mean in terms of the quality of the vintage or the character, whether it's going to have some kind of flavor. But it's pretty nice to have clear skies all over the world, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how that affects everything.
And by the way, and I can't bring up every name, but a number of you emailed me last week, and thank you. It's really great to hear your words, and also to see how that we've been part of your lives a little bit during these Saturday sessions. But many of you are writing about reconnecting with family and so on and so forth, and I think this is huge. So maybe there's part of any of this is trying to find that silver lining in the cloud, and maybe there's a message for us in this. Maybe we were all needing to slow down a little bit, to reconnect with our families a little bit, to spend more time with our little daughter, or
spend more time drinking wine.
Spend more time drinking wine, and thank God for you guys, by the way, because these little tastings and the wines we've sold from them have been helping us support the families that work for us. So thank you. You've been a big part of our lives too, and we're going to keep hanging in there with you on that. So yeah, so I think this vintage is going to be remembered as the great pandemic vintage, and of course that is bittersweet because some of us are losing family members or friends, or know people who are. It has certainly done so much destruction to our economy. But let's find the good in this. Let's find the way to rebound from it and carry forward. We have to. We have no other choice, basically.
Exactly.
We got a little far off the question there, I'm afraid.
No, but it's a hard question to answer. We don't know, and I think that
I'm enjoying the cleaner air, though, right?
I hope everybody is.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice, and I think figuring out ways to keep that going while keeping the economy up to speed is probably one of our, I would say not one of our, I think it's just our biggest challenge going forward. How do we keep that part going how do we keep the good going without the bad?
Yeah.
That's what everyday decision making should always be like, is how do I take all these things that are good and keep those going, and then get rid of the stuff that's the bad. We got a lot of bad too, but you never know what you're going to find out of this. How many vineyards in Napa are doing what we're doing with sustainability and / organic? Are we the only ones, or is it the majority? I would not say it's the majority. There are wineries out there and vineyard grape growers out there who have a lot of these principles in mind. I think this is important. You mentioned this at the very beginning, Dad. I don't think we want to give the impression that we're somehow the only people who care about the environment. Yeah. We're at the top, and everybody else doesn't know what they're doing. Everybody's got their own way of exploring these things, but I think that a surprising number, and maybe honestly, Dad, maybe even maybe I misspoke. Maybe it is the majority.
I honestly think almost everyone is thinking in these directions and doing something. Remember, it's back to, if you're doing nothing, do something. If you're doing a little, do a little bit more. Right?
We talked a little bit about cover crops, in the previous sessions, and the fact that more and more people are using cover crops, using them in a smart way. Those kinds of little decisions. We did a compost seminar. This was now 2 years ago here at the winery. We had 600 people show up to a compost seminar.
Yeah.
That's totally crazy. That's something that would have
People
never
are interested. They often just need to know how. But I'll tell you this: no one has more impact on this than you do. Okay, yeah. We can go out and tell our neighbors and our friends in the wine business to do this. If you ask them, how are your grapes growing, or how do you use glyphosate? What do you start asking these questions. Believe me, even if you ask them of the wine merchant, that news is going to get back to producers, because often that's going to be what tips the scale for a lot of producers, is the consumer reaction to it. And it's back to voting with your dollars and voting with your own concerns. And so you've got a greater ability to impact this question than we ever do. We're going to be here doing it one way or the other. It's just part of who we are. But to get others to do it more, not only in the wine business, but in any business, it's really going to be up to you, voting with your dollars and expressing your concerns. Wouldn't you say?
I think so. Dad, I think we've we've wasted another hour of
We've
people's
wasted
precious time this week.
It was not an hour. It seemed like 15 minutes. Well,
Felt like 2 hours.
We only had 2 bottles this week. That's the problem. Yeah.
Well, please join us next week. Please join me next week to co-taste Troussard Vineyards, and then the week after that, we're going to be doing a Memorial Day picnic for picnic wines, the family picnic. So please do keep joining us. Keep enjoying wine. Please stay safe, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It really means a lot for you to be day drinking with John and Rory yet again.
Great to see you guys. Okay, be safe.